Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is This Sunday Show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time program in English explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm. And I'm Natalia Humenyuk. And that's what we have for you tonight. Ukrainian government decision to agree on so-called Steinmeier formula in an attempt to hold a Normandy format meeting with Russia sparks controversy. We discuss what it really means. Former US envoy to Ukraine, Volker, handed over text message exchanges between some top US officials as well as Ukrainian President's advisor Andriy Yermak. How it affects Ukrainian-US relations. In addition to the discussion, we talked to the Washington Post columnist Anne Applebaum. So, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has agreed on so-called Steinmeier formula, which in attempt to organize the Normandy summit in a format of 3 heads of state. This formula, it's very vague, at the same time concise. It speaks about the time when, on the conditions in which the elections on the occupied territories can take place, and in particular when exactly the status on the special status on the Donbas can be fully adopted. That's more or less about the if the elections would be find clear and find fair by OSCE standards, but that sparked controversy in the part of the Ukrainian society. Within the last day, there were a few rallies. In particular, today there were up to 10,000 people in Kyiv and some other cities around the country, in order to discuss what it all means and where we are moving, because it's indeed a breakthrough. It might be a breakthrough in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict resolution at that moment. According to some people, according to the others, there are the strong risks. So we have the panel to discuss. We have with us Mariya Ionova, who is the MP from the European Solidarity Party, formed by the former president of Poroshenko, and as well Oleksiy Matsuka, who just recently is editor-in-chief of the News of the Donbas Agency, expert on Donbas, and also has recently written a column to us on the particularly how the Steinmeier formula had been accepted by the Ukrainian society and whether it's the best response. You can also read this column on our webpage. You can follow the link on our Twitter. But before we start the discussion, so good evening, good to have you here.
Good evening.
And I would like first to start with the address of the President Zelenskyy. You have it in English. I know some of our foreign experts and the audience wanted to hear in particular what exactly President Zelenskyy said.
Dear Ukrainians, I might disappoint some of you, but there will be no betrayal, and this is why. Hear me out, please. Let's start with the main thing. Do we want the war to end and all Ukrainian territories back? Yes, we do. Currently, there's only one stage where these issues can be discussed at the highest level. It is the Normandy format meeting. Could it have taken place in the near future? No. Why? There was one barrier in the way, the greatest scare story of the past few weeks, the Steinmeier formula. Let's clarify what this formula is. Does it stipulate that Ukraine recognizes annexation of Crimea and gives up on the Donbas? No. Does it stipulate for the elections in the occupied Donbas to take place at gunpoint tomorrow? No. Why did the previous president of Ukraine announce beginning work on the implementation of this formula 3 years ago? Did he intend to betray Ukraine? This formula provides for one thing, when the so-called law on the Donbas special status should come into force. Namely, after the local elections take place there, in compliance with the Constitution of Ukraine, Ukrainian law, and after the OSCE publishes a report that states that the elections were held according to the international democratic standards. This is what we agreed to in Minsk. Did we sign any joint agreements with the so-called DPR or LPR? No. We sent a separate letter to the special representative of the OSCE, Mr. Sidik, wherein we affirmed agreement of the positions in the text of this formula. What's next? Elections in the Donbas tomorrow? No. Next up is a Normandy format meeting with the President of France, the German Chancellor, and the President of the Russian Federation, where we will discuss ways of ending the war in the Donbas. My position on this issue is clear and understandable, and it concurs with the position of all Ukrainians. We all understand that Donbas is Ukraine. Peace must prevail there. There must be a total ceasefire. Foreign military formations must be disengaged. We all understand that the Ukraine-Russia border on our side must be guarded by Ukrainian border patrol. An exchange of prisoners must take place so that all our citizens return home. Elections must be held not at gunpoint, but according to the Ukrainian legislation, with access for candidates from Ukrainian political forces, for Ukrainian media and international observers, with internally displaced persons having the right to exercise their right to vote. All this will be discussed at the Normandy format meeting. Will a new law on the special status of the Donbas be signed there? No. This law is in effect until December 31st, 2019. There will be a new law. Will it be swiftly drafted and approved? No. We will write it together, in cooperation and with public discussion with the entire Ukrainian society. No red lines will be crossed. Hence, no capitulation, no surrender of the national interests of Ukraine, no fixed agreements, and no global steps without the consent of the people of Ukraine. Only the return of our people and our territories, return of prisoners, and return of peace. Ahead of us, we have a long and winding road to the resolution of this problem, and we have to walk it together. And we need unity here. I respect the constitutional right of each Ukrainian to protest. I hear you, and trust me, I will never give up Ukraine. At the same time, I implore you to be level-headed and calm with regard to the situation. Don't give in to manipulations and provocations of certain people. They really want to exploit you and return the right to steal, become victims of political persecution, and avoid criminal liability. This will not happen. Everything will be Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.
Слава Україні!
So we have the guests to discuss. We probably will start with Oleksiy. In particular, you are for a while covering the Donbas war, and in particular recently, when we look to some of the op-eds in Ukraine and abroad, we see all kind of the concerns. There are different kind of words used as a capitulation and all others. But in your publication and in recent column we just seen, you're saying that there is quite a positive process and there is maybe a bit too much of the concerns. We will talk about them. We have written a lot about them, but your opinion in this a bit stands out.
You know, if we see on the situation through humanitarian dimension, of course it's positive signal for Donbas residents that our president will start build this bridge with Luhansk and Donetsk through humanitarian questions about pensions, amnesty and other. But it's just only on the paper. We heard they propositions about that. But we see that fast and very quick steps on the political track, you know, and I think that if people in Kyiv compare this political and humanitarian tracks and see very fast they steps on that, and I see they fear that they don't know the plan, next steps of president on these questions.
I would ask Mariya, because your political force, European Solidarity, openly, especially the former President Poroshenko, today speaks very much against so-called Steinmeier formula. However, early in 2016, he was backing this proposition. We had some quotes that, in particular, that we spoke separately about the preparation for the elections and agreed at the experts level to carry on the work in preparing the selective legislation implementation of the so-called Steinmeier formula. Now he's speaking about that it was invented in the Kremlin. Can you just also explain in particular that the European Solidarity at former bloc of Petro Poroshenko, they were supporting Minsk in front of the international partners, but now it's like they're against.
No. So let's see the whole picture. First of all, Minsk Agreement. We remember in what conditions we signed Minsk Agreement 1, Minsk Agreement 2. First, it was Ilovaisk and a big attack of Russia Federation. Second, it was Debaltseve. Regarding this formula, this track, as Oleksiy said, it's only about election. It's only about political part. And believe me, we were fighting with Formula Steinmeier, Mariya's plan, Formula Saiduk, I mean, all these years. And yes, the president was talking about this formula, but only in parallel with the security issues. So all this, provisions were every time in parallel with the security issue. That is why on the first place is security. And yes, humanitarian bloc, the step forward have been done, but we don't know still the price. And the whole issue, and Oleksiy has mentioned already about this, it's a lack of communication. It's absolutely, no clear roadmap for all this situation, because election, it's not about 6 or 8 months. I mean, it's much more longer. So we would like to see this calendar of action by President Zelenskyy.
But I want to mention that what the Minister of Foreign Affairs Pristaika said on his when he had a speech on the Parliament, and he said that they need 6 months for the mission in Donbas, and also what important that previously authorities they used to some kind of cunning for end war with Russia, and some category of our citizens think that Minsk agreement it is like a cunning for us, and we decide problem open conflict with that territory and with Russia. So now it's interesting, that President Zelenskyy proposed new formula that based on the direct conversation with the people from that side, because they all wait from Kyiv positive and clear signal that they are part of Ukraine, and Kyiv think about that and want to do something for them.
Sorry, but
how you can explain
during
this?
All these years, we were not refusing from the people. The problem was that the humanitarian international organization, the access was blocked during all these years.
But today we heard on the street some people from around the protesters, they say that we need the wall with Donbas.
Because Zelenskyy has mentioned it. He told that if I am not agreed the agreement in Normand, then I will build a wall. That was also.
It is a plan C, and Pristaika mentioned it during Schuster show.
Okay, but unfortunately, what would I say? That unfortunately all these months, if I'm probably when we are calculating, a lot of different messaging from the team of the president also. That is why people really cannot understand, the picture and the chronology of all these events. Because security, that's on the first place.
But look, then my question would be also for you in this regard. Because you said there is a complexity, but, the previous government had 4 years to explain. I probably explained that maybe first 2 were too busy. But then there was always quite a lot of confusion. And if you look at the reasoning of many people today who are against, and we later would go to statistic to what extent it's representative to the society, but they are speaking against withdrawal of the troops, against the things which are in the Minsk agreement.
And so because we hear it only from one side, not from pro-Russian and not from Russian side. We didn't have any guarantees from other side on security issue. Do we have the security issue in Stolnitsa Luganska? No. Do we have all these issues in Zolotoye or Petrovska? No. We also know that why Russians has chosen these 3 points. We know. It's strategically why they need Zolotoye and why they need Petrovska. Petrovska, it's about Mariupol. Zolotoye, it's about other things. Stanitsa Luganska, it's about that. It's about the electric station. So we have withdrawn our military from, for example, Stanitsa Luganska. Do we have still separatists on Gora Igor, on a high hill? Yes, we have. Do OSCE mission have the success on this strategic fire points? no.
Yeah, but we have another experience for that, and it's positive experience how release our prisoners from Moscow, and it was when Kyiv and Moscow speak directly.
So I would probably...
But I'm sorry, it was absolutely agreed with Macron and Merkel. And thankfully to Macron, this humanitarian issue was decided. But the price, we still do not know.
However, I should say that probably at that point the Western partners said that they were not very much, at least to our information, they denied a huge involvement. Most probably the President Macron, of course. But I probably would bring something else, because I understand that we can get in this stalemate of discussion what should come first, but there is a kind of a momentum where these things are discussed, and I want to bring the data from the Ukrainians that was made by, there is a poll made by the sociological group Rating with 2,000 respondents. We should mention that the error margin is no more than 2.2%. So it's recent, the end of September. So the question was, which solution to the Donbas problem do you support? And we see that 34% of the Ukrainians want to end hostilities and recognition of the territories as temporarily occupied and freezing the conflict. 23 granting these territories to the status of autonomy, and 23%, more or less, continuation of hostilities until full restoration of Ukrainian authority. For many, for 14%, it's difficult to answer. But generally, it looks altogether that around 60% of the Ukrainians somehow agreeing on some kind of the resolution, even if it requires some of the I don't know, some concessions. And to what, there is another question, it's to what extent do you support the Steinmeier formula as a peace settlement initiative to resolve the conflict in the Donbas? So for 60% it's difficult to answer. For altogether 18% they tend to support, and 23% tend not to support. So it's, we can say it's divisive, but in general you see that people don't really understand what
that is why it's a lack of communication, as we mentioned before.
But do you think that these kind of slogans of capitulation just fuels this lack of understanding?
You know, Natalia, today on the on Maidan, I mean, also I have read and I have seen it from my friends. Most of the people, when journalists ask them why you are here, so, and how do you suggest to solve the problem of Donbas? So one word in majority was victory, by victory. And the problem is, when you ask me also about 2016, 2017, I was in the parliament and we had Minsk platform of records there in the parliament. So every plenary, when we had people from contact groups from Minsk, every time when they returned from Minsk. So we have heard from, you know, first from this person, the details, what was going on. Regarding, again, if I repeat, every time Poroshenko was telling that on first place is security, and even if we're discussing formulas or others, it was every time was parallel insecurity, and he didn't answer anything, and his contact groups also didn't sign anything, because we know, and we were thinking, and we were pressing, and we had a mutual common position with President, with Parliament and government, that it's we have to make Russia to implement Minsk agreement.
That was something which was happening, and it can last for some time. In the end, we have no
presidential elections.
Yeah,
and Putin didn't want to give any person to Poroshenko. So, of course, for him it's much easier to solve all the problem and to freeze or to make or to still have like a Prидnestrovia through Zelenskyy, by Zelenskyy hand.
There is the result of the presidential elections, and you also mentioned about the people who were protesting. We also said about that there are maybe a particular amount of people who probably would like victory, and we have this huge majority who maybe don't know what exactly it should be, but is ready for the peaceful resolution. So what do you think, how we can shape this discussion in order not to remain in the stalemate?
That I think that some people and majority who today joined for this meeting on the street in Maidan, they don't trust Zelensky, and they want to see that, they like feeling that they lose their chances during these elections that we had. And people want to see something very directly decision with the Donbas. But even that 1+1 show Zelensky comments, because
1+1 is the channel owned by oligarch Igor Hromadske, who backed President Zelensky.
So Zelensky repeatedly said that they will not surrender Ukraine in any way, and few times repeated, but people don't trust on his these words.
No,
Why? I
I
absolutely agree with you that Office of President didn't build efficacy communication with the majority of society, but even especially with this 25% who support Poroshenko.
No. A lot of people were saying that that's the difference. A lot of people on Maidan today were saying that we were voted for Zelensky, but we do not hear the answers. Do you think, as a journalist, it's not a problem that Zelensky, after 4 months, didn't give a wide press conference? Do you think it's fine?
I think it's a problem, of course.
Shouldn't interfere in the way, because you currently referring to the protests. We had to, we said that there were 10,000 people, there were people around the country, but we also showed the, like some other popular opinion. So our question is as well, is it any disattachment in what is happening here and what are the views around the country, and there is a lack more of thorough discussion among the larger population. I probably have to give a word. We earlier had chance to talk to the another member of the Servant of the People party, the head of the Committee for Foreign Relations, Bogdan Yaremenko, and that's what he explained, how he explained what the plan is so far.
It doesn't matter what the Steinmeier formula stipulates, because there is a Zelensky formula. President Zelensky is trying to bring peace, and he has clearly set out the red lines, which he would never cross in the process. Albeit he does want to bring peace. In order to bring peace, one has to talk with Putin, because he is the only reason there is an ongoing war in our country. President Zelensky wants to hold the Normandy 4 summit, because for us, it is the most palatable form of dialogue with Putin, I mean with international mediation. And Russia, as a party that can dictate its terms because its military is in our territories, and its military is killing our soldiers, set one of the preconditions for holding a Normandy 4 summit, namely, approval of the mechanism, the way the law and the special status of certain districts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions during the peace settlement process will be implemented. As a matter of fact, using the words, or even a written letter from a representative to the Trilateral Contact Group, we informed the OSCE that we are okay with the mechanism previously discussed by the advisors to the heads of states of the Normandy 4.
So there is, at this moment, there is this discussion that there is no clarity. Maybe I can ask you two just very simple questions. Why you would use, or you think, do you support the idea to use the word capitulation? Is in the public discourse regarding particularly this formula, which quite an emotional? And the second, what exactly is something your major concern? If to be very precise, because I will quote, for example, Bogdan Yaremenko, who mentioned from Tribune in the Verkhovna Rada that we have agreed on Russian propositions, that Russia will bring peace, and the last his statement that we will consider and we will decide, for example, we will discuss the law on self-governance in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, we will agree this draft bill was Russian. So for me, of course, it's a question. And it's not only for me. That is why, about capitulation, it means that we really do not know if this election will be when the border, Russian-Ukraine and Ukrainian border will be closed, or will be by control, or not, or after. We don't know. Also, Zelensky and his team is talking about new draft law. We don't know this draft law. We even do not know the details. Why? I mean, for example, in our draft law, which is still, we have involved our political agreement from Minsk agreement, because this law of self-governance is still active till the end of the year. And it is absolutely clear condition on election and when this election could be. So can I clarify? So yes. you against, because you just against Because I'm a bit confused, because you don't know what's there, but it's up to the parliament then discuss.
I'm not against Ukraine. I'm against
No. I mean, like,
to agree all the proposition and the draft bills with Russia Federation. Why Ukrainian parliament has to agree any draft law with Russia Federation? May I ask you?
But there was, you don't ask me, there is
No,
the
I mean,
answer.
anyone
there
to
was a
ask.
recent answer, or there is a recent answer of Bogdan Yeremenko there. My question is to you, what do you think should be the question? Because what it feels today that there is quite a cloud regarding the general idea of whether the whole negotiation should take place. You know, there is something we're discussing, but what should be the question you think the journalists, the analysts should be asked in order we move forward?
I think the most important question, how they do this, if process going on. So what next steps we will see. It's amnesty, it's election, how they can do this election, and the main question, who control the border? Because if election process start with Russians inside, it's very dangerous for our democracy, of course. But what the arguments they have for Putin to agree during Normandy this month that he will agree with the logical of Ukrainians that Russia should go out from Donbas region. And we don't know in reality this. But also I want to remember the situation when there is majority on the parliament, also civic society, we don't know about the draft of this law that Rada adopted during...
You mean the previous law?
Yes, previously.
I'm sorry,
now,
that was all together with the Ivazovska ask. I mean, that was all together with the expert.
But big society,
society,
we don't know about
sorry.
this draft. And especially people from Donbas, they didn't involve in this process. Maybe Ivazovska, you spoke about that, but with the average people from that side. No.
Olga Ivazovska is the representative of the Opora organization, which is a watchdog on the elections, and was also represented.
Anyway, this process, what we name peacemaking, peace building, it's always very high process. And we need to know
Oleksiy,
it.
what people now are saying in Zolotoye, Lugansk and Petrovska, what are they asking?
It's different voices. We know it because we film in
No, for example, in Zolotoye there is 529 families.
Some people fear that Russians will come
Yes.
if we stop
Because
our
it's
control.
no guarantee, again.
Yes, it's absolutely no guarantee.
From other
but
side.
It's open conflict. We don't have guarantee in any questions now.
So,
Unfortunately.
No. Zelenskyy is saying that it's his guarantees.
Okay, we will see it in Normandy in Paris in middle
So
October.
everything what he is doing now, it's just to have Normand. So we hope that if they will not agree in Normand, there will not be any election and other steps, yes?
you hope that nothing happens.
No. I hope, but telling the truth, when we are already in formula or in electional point, why Russians has to be interesting to discuss security issue, especially when already our international partners not very on Ukrainian side?
I don't have answer on this because I'm not politician, but I see on the situation through my journalism view, and we can estimate your position, other political fractions and others, but I know what people want in the field, in the Donbas region. They all want peace. Yes,
of course. But peace
and Zelenskyy
by
by
any price.
But the peace by any price is kind of a phrase, and I guess we are, serious enough not to speak about metaphors, but about
and not only security, humanitarian questions also. And for people there, it is #1 questions, humanitarian, because it's money, it's food, it's logistical.
But it's also responsibility not only Ukraine, but it's also,
and we have positive example in Stanitsa with the bridge, and now Ukrainian government built this bridge.
But with the propositions and on that conditions which Russian wanted.
But the bridge
weeds is like tank will go. We were against the weeds of this bridge
so
for
better
tanks.
without bridge.
Now this bridge is the weeds. The weeds is like tank can go.
Do you see that in the conflict resolution there are sometimes the particular concessions in order to gain humanitarian security?
Again, we are absolutely in favor, but the details, I think that you as a journalist are not also satisfied that you don't have enough information. It's the same
We
for
don't
us.
have access
We don't
even
have
for the occupied area, you know. And the same situation in Kyiv.
But it's whose guilt? Ukrainian government and president? No, Russians. So we have to at least to hear from them something. We don't hear from them anything on security, on election, on other.
So obviously we won't solve or find any agreement within like one program an hour, because I just should probably explain to our audience that it's probably the start of the very serious and tough and difficult discussions we will go on in this studio if the process is moving. It can stuck at any point if the Normandy meeting happens or not. But I'm thanking you for the discussion. It probably represents the part of the discussion we have here. It could be definitely broader.
No, we have the common issue. The common issue is that it's not enough information and a lack of communication.
Some people would probably not agree, because you said, like, we had the address of the president, we had the explanation. Sometimes some things are clear, some things are obviously explained many times.
The devil is into details.
Obviously, but that's what we understand there in
And we try to know these details during this program.
Yeah, but I probably would say there is a general, of course, bigger concern of the Ukrainian society, that there is zero trust to Russia, disregarding what the agreement would be, that little people can trust Russia, and therefore it creates such an emotional so many emotions. At the same time, of course, from the Western partners, it's hard to understand what is a guarantee that Russia would fulfill their obligation. I guess that's something we can agree what is in the core of the debate. But still, we ask for the questions to our foreign partners, and thanks a lot for you to be here. But we had earlier a chance to talk with the Secretary General of the OSCE, Thomas Greminger. Usually they are speaking quite generally, however, still it's his explanation on what's their role, and that's you can get from us now.
On the political level, we've seen the implementation of an important confidence-building measure, and that is the exchange of detainees. I think this could be a first step towards improving Ukrainian-Russian bilateral relations. On the ground, we've seen since the last recommitment to the ceasefire a 75% reduction of ceasefire violations. All in all, the ceasefire is better respected than in previous periods. We have seen from the 26th of June on disengagement in Steinmeier, Luganska. Finally, one is tempted to say, which in turn allows the start of repairing of this famous Steinmeier, Luganska bridge. We also see in the trilateral contact group, the 5 signatories of the Minsk agreements meet, a more positive, a more constructive mood, and I think we are quite close also to a start of disengagement from the disengagement areas 2 and 3, that is Solotyn and Petrivske. What we need clearly is a sustained political commitment in order to consolidate this positive dynamic. I think the change in government clearly brought a strong new impetus, a positive impulse, and a political commitment that you need. But I would immediately add that you obviously need the political commitments by all sides if you want to progress. And what I can see right now is a political will by the key stakeholders to move forward in implementing the Minsk agreements, and that for me is clearly light at the end of the tunnel. Look, you always need enlightened political leaders that muster the political commitment to advance in a peace process, to also make the concessions at times that are necessary in return for steps forward, and I think that is what we are currently witnessing. The Steinmeier formula is basically a proposal on sequencing certain measures, important measures that are foreseen in the Minsk agreement. It's basically about the entry into force of the special status law once local elections have been held. First on a temporary basis, and then once there is a declaration of the elections as being according to OEC international standards and Ukrainian legislation, the law would enter into force for good. And, well, the role of ODIHR-OEC is as OEC's center of expertise for elections. Well, ODIHR will have to conclude if these standards have been met by and large. I think you need favorable security conditions. We need a sustained ceasefire, clearly. But then this is clearly not enough. We need freedom of movement, we need freedom of assembly, we need freedom of speech. These are all necessary elements for an enabling environment to hold elections that can be considered free and fair.
So that was the interview with Secretary General of OSCE. You can watch the full versions of our interview and reports at hromadske.ua. You can also follow all our stories on Twitter and Facebook. Search Hromadske International. There are way more stories there. While we are going to the second topic of our program. So. Yeah, and I would probably also tell you that we encourage you to support Hromadske by donations. We are independent media. So in order we work for you and for our audience, you can go to our webpage and send your donations. So in this part of the program, we obviously discuss another big news of this week. The scandal is ongoing with the impeachment inquiry against the President Donald Trump because his possible pressure to the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy. This week we had a chance to read the exchange messages between the US top officials, in particularly former envoy to the Ukraine from the United States, with the charge d'affaires here and Ukrainian President Advisor Yermak. They were published, but we would probably remind the most interesting of them.
Mr. Mayor, really enjoyed breakfast this morning. As discussed, connecting you here with Andrei Yermak, who's very close to President Zelenskyy. I suggest we schedule a call together on Monday, maybe 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Washington time. Kurt. Good lunch, thanks. Heard from White House, assuming President Z convinces Trump he will investigate, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, we will nail down date for visit to Washington. Good luck. See you tomorrow. Hi, Kurt. Please let me know when you can talk. I think it's possible to make this declaration and mention all these things, which we discussed yesterday, but it will be logical to do so after we receive a confirmation of date. We will inform you about the date of the visit and about our expectations and our guarantees for future visits. Let's discuss it. Once we have a date, we'll call for a press briefing announcing upcoming visit and outlining vision for the reboot of U.S.-Ukraine relationship, including, among other things, Burisma and election meddling investigations. The nightmare is that they give the interview and don't get the security assistance. The Russians love it, and I quit. Bill, I never said I was right. I said we are where we are and believe we have identified the best pathway forward. Let's hope it works. As I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign.
So Ukraine is in the spot for the international media, and we have with us here in Kyiv Oliver Carroll, who is a Moscow correspondent for The Independent. Good evening. And I know so there are a lot of independent media coming to Ukraine to find out what's happening with this story, what we can find from Ukraine. In a lot of cases, this story is very American, a lot of things happening there, but still, to what extent do you think you can find out from the Ukrainian officials some bits of this story? Are they talking? Are they explaining the situation?
Well, the general reaction from Ukrainian officials so far has been keeping as quiet as possible. But you're absolutely right. This is a story fundamentally about American corruption And we, when Trump came to power, we all looked at his tweets and we poked fun at his lack of syntax. But what actually we're now understanding is he's playing not only with grammatical syntax, he's messed around with the whole political syntax of the whole world, with the international order, with logical underpinnings. And so from Ukraine's point of view, at least from what people have been telling me, it's obviously very disappointing because, they've been told that black is white and white is black. It's a postmodern playbook added with a little bit of mob law. And all the things that they've been told from the Americans that we're going to support the corruption drive, we're going to support you in your reforms. They now see that America is supporting the people who were at the front of that fight, and saying that they're the crooks. And it's very confusing for them. As I say, the majority of the people connected with the administration are being extremely careful because they understand so many mistakes have been made already. There's a real sense that let's just make sure we don't make any more mistakes, and that means not talking to journalists. But what they're trying to do is stay in the middle of a road which is incredibly dangerous. They have Republicans on one side, they have Democrats on the other, and they're trying to keep that really thin line, and they can be mowed over from whichever side of the road they want. And this week, I think with the Hromadske announcement, which was when the new general prosecutor said that they were opening a limited review, an audit he called it.
Audit.
I mean, then we understand it was being done within the framework of a change within the way that the prosecutor deals with cases. So certain cases are supposed to be transferred to the National Anti-Corruption Board, Bureau rather. I think there's obviously been a calculation in there. This is the morsel they can give to the American president without upsetting everything. But I think that in the subsequent walking back on the original announcement, you can see some of the tensions which are in play there. And I suppose that my feeling, and I suppose the of those people close to power I've spoken to, their fear is that this is only going to get worse. We've seen a pretty junk, crazy conspiracy theory put across about Vice President Biden supposedly removing the then Prosecutor General at the time, Viktor Shokin, to stop a supposed investigation which actually wasn't going on into his son's company. Now, with Lutsenko, the next former general prosecutor, he was at one point encouraging those conversations, and now he's flip-flopped back. And Giuliani now understands he's not necessarily the best source in the world. So there might be a walking back on that particular point. But what about the other things they've been talking about? The supposed interference of Ukrainians into the US elections. And if you looked at the interesting statement given by Kurt Walker to the Congressional Committee, you'll see even he is hinting that, as he sees it, there might be something more in it than Biden. So I think, I dread to see where this ends up, and I think that's from what I gather, that seems to be the impression of the Ukrainian government. It's a really hard task for them. It's a new front. It's a new war, basically.
I probably would also need to clarify that you can also find on our webpage the article with the clear translation into English of what exactly new Ukrainian Prosecutor General said about the audit of Burisma, the company where the former Vice President of the US, Joe Biden's son Hunter, used to be in the board. The investigation in Ukraine used to be about the period way before the Biden son was there, and the prosecutor Hromadske quite carefully used the word audit, and it was also the response for the journalist question. So it was not that much the idea of the Ukrainian government to speak about that, but there was quite a long briefing on all the new issues. But in order to get also what's going on in Washington and how Washington D.C. and how people react there, what to expect from the U.S.-Ukrainian relations in this moment, we just right before the program had a chance to talk to the Washington Post columnist and the well-known author Anne Applebaum. And good to have you with us. So this week we found out that, and we read the correspondence between a number of the U.S. officials, like Special Envoy Volker, Charge d'Affaires to the embassy here, Taylor, U.S. ambassador to Europe, and Ukrainian advisor to the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, that there was kind of a systematic movement that the possible meeting between Ukrainian and American president may be connected to the fact that the Ukrainian president would somehow comment publicly on that there is something wrong with Joe Biden here, there is something wrong with the Burisma company. To what it may lead, what it means because this is a kind of a new round of the scandal after the first conversation between the president had become public.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about those exchanges is you can see on them that there are two kinds of public officials, right? So there's, as you said, Bill Taylor, who's the charge in Kyiv. There's Kurt Volker on the one hand. Those are State Department officials whose interests are in U.S. national interests and in promoting peace in Ukraine and in protecting Ukraine against further incursions from Russia. On the other hand, you see a different kind of official who's really interested in helping Trump win the next election. And they're looking for, as you say, for a public statement on two kinds of things. One is really anything connected to the Bidens, anything that could somehow smear or cast doubt on Joe Biden's honesty. And the other thing they're looking for is some kind of indication that something went wrong in the 2016 elections, that somehow Ukraine had something to do with maybe even the hacking of the DNC. This was in Trump's phone call with Zelenskyy. And so you can see this conflict between these two kinds of officials. And this is really the story of American foreign policy in the last 2 years, which is that on the one hand, you have sort of normal public servants who are still acting in the American national interest, and on the other hand, you have Trump people who are seeking to promote the president. And that's very clear in Washington, that was the dynamic of what was going on, and that Bill Taylor is very shocked. He's saying things like, no, there's no way we're going to trade aid to Ukraine for some kind of help for the president. And then on the other hand, you have the ambassador to the EU, Sunderland, saying, let's not talk about this in a text message, let's have a phone call. And so you can see these different priorities. What happens now? There's more to come, I think. We still have the testimony from the former Ambassador Yovanovitch, who was very abruptly recalled. And there may be some more stories, maybe even another whistleblower coming out of the NSC and the White House. But the important thing, I think, for Ukrainians to understand is the existence of this conflict, that there were two kinds of policies being run at the same time out of Washington. And one of them was the policy that had, by the way, the support of Congress, that has the support of the State Department, that has the support of the traditional foreign policy establishment. And on the other hand, you have a kind of rogue operation being run by Giuliani, being run by, somehow coming from Trump. It's not clear whether they were trying to please Trump or Trump ordered them to do it. We're not sure. So on the other hand, you have this kind of, different thing happening. And, I think we're going to learn some more details in the next week or two, and that will enable people in Washington to make some kind of judgment about what happens next.
What in this case, these are what Ukrainians are concerned, the Ukrainian president in particular may do, and how also Ukraine is seen from these exchanges, because the debate are here, like, could he or his team act differently? There is still Donald Trump, their president, there is still Rudy Giuliani, there is still, the need for the American support.
Yeah. So look, I do not envy President Zelenskyy. He does not have any good options, and I hope that Ukrainians understand that. Whatever you think of him, he's in a really impossible situation. I mean, you're absolutely right. On the one hand, you can see already that he and his team are trying to be as quiet as possible. He said, "I don't want to interfere in the U.S. elections." He wants to say Trump has not pressured me in any way. He does not want to anger the U.S. president. On the other hand, of course, he doesn't want to anger the Democrats. And so his best policy is going to be to keep as low profile as possible and to really try and stay out of it. I mean, I know that it sounds strange, but in some very profound way, this isn't even really about Ukraine. It's about the nature of the White House and the nature of the Trump presidency, which, as I say, is very different from any presidency we've had in modern times. We have not had a U.S. president who seeks to use the levers of foreign policy for his personal benefit. That has not happened. Maybe it happened sometime in the 19th century, and I can't remember it, but certainly not since the Second World War have we had anything like that. And so really the scandal is about that. And for Ukraine, the best policy is to kind of stay out of the scandal if you can. It's not, you're sort of part of it. The name of the country is part of it. People are talking about events in Ukraine, but really fundamentally, this is not a Ukrainian scandal. It's a White House scandal.
Still, if to look at the foreign U.S.-Ukraine relations, to what extent Ukraine now can, wait for any kind of bipartisan support? As well, many people said, what I heard, that, Ukraine is becoming toxic. So now for anybody out of the politicians to come here to talk to anybody might be somehow, may create some problem. So if not speak about just Trump, but maybe Congress and people from different parties, how they may treat Ukraine in this way, if you speak in particular about the relations between the countries?
Actually, I think there is paradoxically, one of the effects of this scandal may be an increase of bipartisan support for Ukraine. In other words, people can see that Trump is exploiting Ukraine somehow. And remember that this military aid that he was withholding was mandated by Congress. And so I think that one of the effects may be certainly on the Democratic side, which is the majority in the House, but even on the Republican side, where there are a lot of people who still are committed to traditional American foreign policy and who are committed to national security, I think that the support for Ukraine, both moral support, maybe in the future military support if necessary, diplomatic support, I think in Congress will increase. And as there's a feeling that somehow Ukraine is being played by a white, and remember that in Washington, so certainly in Congress, nobody likes this president. The Senate does not like him. Many of them feel they have to, pay lip service to him, or they have to, publicly support him. But in private, they don't like him, and they say it all the time. So it's not a big mystery. And so there's a lot of sympathy for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian position. Absolutely everybody understands that Zelenskyy is in an impossible position. But I mean, yes, you're probably right that there aren't going to be a lot of trips to Ukraine until this thing is sorted out somehow.
And at the same time, we have a bit different momentum in Ukraine with the negotiation over the conflict in the Donbas. For a while, Ukraine was waiting that the US would have a stronger say in that, because it's always considered that Europe is too mild. Now, Volker, who used to be a special envoy in the US, is not there any longer. We even don't know whether it would be a new person. But in any case, it looks like at this particular moment, when there are the possible negotiations, there is no possibility to wait anything from particularly US president to be on the Ukrainian side, especially from, he wasn't there openly, but somehow there was still this not very clear policy. So do you think for another year, before these elections, we can at all expect that there is a strong US position, and particularly in position of the president in Russian-Ukrainian conflict?
So I'm afraid that even before this scandal, Trump had no interest in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And whatever you saw, the support that you saw was coming from State Department officials in Congress, particularly Kurt Volker, but also others. So I'm sorry to say I would not count on the U.S. I mean, I want to be very careful how I say that because, I mean, if there were an emergency, if there were a further Russian invasion, then the situation might change. But I think if it's a question of delicate negotiations and decisions, to be made as to the future of Donbas, I think that Ukraine should make those decisions from its own perspective and what it thinks is the best to do, and not worry about Washington. I don't think you're going to get a strong support one way or the other. Or it's not even about support; it's about interest, because Washington is now going to be distracted by something else.
So, Anne, thanks a lot for the clarification and from your view from Washington, D.C.
Thanks.
So that was what we heard from Washington, D.C., and we've just been discussing that as well. The these exchanges of the messages showed that there was a change of the position of the Ukrainian government, most probably after the number of the US officials said that Giuliani is important.
Mm-hmm. At the very beginning, I mean, I broke a story which basically was that when Giuliani was trying to come here in May, he was basically snubbed by the very new administration at the time. Now, obviously, the position of Zelenskyy has moved from there quite substantially. And you can see in these text messages that basically they're agreeing to play ball as they think their national interest is. I mean, obviously, if we're going to look at the positives, and there aren't many in this whole situation, it's that this is happening early on in the Zelenskyy administration, and it's happening early on in this process. So it would be very difficult to see that quid pro quo now enacted. As I said before, the danger is that maybe other things might be pressed on.
And the questions on the other things in Ukraine, because there are two stories which in particular Giuliani and Trump want to spin. One is as if there is some investigations about the Joe Biden corruption, and as if the dismissal of the former prosecutor and his son, president of the company, are connected. It's not. I really should say it's not. We don't want again to play to this. As well, that there is no reason to speak on the interference of Ukraine to the elections in the US. However, this story is spinned. Yeah. As a foreign reporter working now here, what are also the stories you see your colleagues are doing, how you can work with those topics?
Sorry.
How you can work with both those topics, which are always spin, but you know, because there is this difficult choice. Anytime you report, you kind of still making this story bigger.
It's true, and unfortunately, the resources and your the one sensible article which comes out, which has been fact-checked, which is written by people who know the story instead of American journalists who consider themselves Russian experts after they mastered the Cyrillic alphabet and area experts, and it is to drop in the ocean. It's very difficult. But I think once an article, once a theme, once a theory gets out there, as it has done, we have a duty to go back through every single point and document it in a way which is understandable for the world audience. We are playing with the absurd here. We're in new times, and we're basically joining a battle which our American colleagues have been fighting pretty much every day for the last 2 years.
So still, what would be the questions, for instance, for the Ukrainian authorities on a different level, maybe on these new authorities and old authorities, to what extent they may help to kind of clarify some of the things? What would you think would be helpful?
I think they're in an incredibly difficult situation, and the only thing they can really do at the moment is not add to this, not add wood to the fire, the flames of which we can see everywhere. You know, the Zelenskyy administration would be best to do as little as they can. I think, unfortunately, the way we're heading is they may be tempted to open some kind of limited investigation, but understanding that the optics of that are playing right into the hands of the American political game. So, to use a phrase which has been mentioned, they need a white glove approach to this. They need to keep as far away as possible and stay as close to the law as they possibly can.
But do you think you still need some clarification, for instance, from former authorities?
From former authorities?
Yeah.
There's probably a reason why they're not coming out with those clarifications, because there's an awful lot of skeletons in the cupboard, not necessarily connected to the American political game. It's going to be very difficult for them to make things clear on that front, I would imagine.
Okay, so good luck with your stories. I should say also that you can read quite a lot of them, a lot of explainers on what's really the case of Burisma company stands for and to why it's not really connected to Joe Biden's attempt to dismiss a former general prosecutor. As well, quite a few explanation on why how in particular, what was the role of the Ukrainian MPs in speaking about the Manafort and why it's not really about the US elections or Ukrainian state attempt, but that's all is there at en.hromadske.ua. Stay with us. We are explaining those complicated stories for you 24/7, and sign up for our weekly newsletter. So in the end of the week, you can get all the most important stories we produced. In order to sign up for the newsletter, you can find the button on the top right side of our webpage. And with that, I tell you goodbye.